Welcome to Chai Pe Kharcha, where we have conversations on personal finance among four NRI professionals working at tech firms. Think of these like water cooler chats you have at the office. Only this time, you will have Ishan, Madhvesh, Rohit, and Siddharth as colleagues you will be listening into. Before we get started, a quick disclaimer. We are not financial experts. The content provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. Always consult with a qualified financial professional if you need financial advice. Welcome back. We will continue from where we left off in the last episode. Hope you enjoy the show.
Awesome. We are back after a short break. Let's continue our conversation with Gaurav, who's based in Dublin. He's been talking about life as an NRI and his journey. Just before we started, Gaurav, you had a very interesting question. I think that was a fun topic.
Yeah, no, I was just sharing that once you stay out for a while and then when you go back and because of the currency conversion rates, I've become less mindful about spending on things which are obviously not very going to make a material difference, but like even things like small shoppings, eating out, entertainment. So I was just trying to get a perspective if like everyone feels that way or at some point does it differ if you have that end goal that I'm moving back to India? So you are still consciously thinking about things. How does that change and evolve with time?
Totally. I think मेरे पापा के साथ 2-3 बार इस टॉपिक पे बहस हो चुकी है. Because something which is like 1,000 rupees, 2,000 rupees, still kind of a big deal. But after living outside for so many years, you convert it into dollars and वो लगता है कि यार ठीक है, $4-5, $10, $15 की चीजें हटाओ. तो उसकी वजह से काफी डांट पड़ती. I have not paused to think about the fact कि अगर मैं इंडिया परमानेंटली वापस आ रहा होता, would I have been as careless with this particular spend as I'm being right now? क्योंकि अभी मुझे पता है कि यार मेरी सैलरी 10-15 दिन में आने वाली है जिसमें this small amount of money will be completely negligible. But
Yeah.
it's a good worth thinking about the next time I pull out my wallet and ऑटो वाला बोले छूटा नहीं है and I'm like कि कोई नहीं भाई रख ले. अगली बार
I'll,
से.
I'll give you an alternate perspective on that. ये मेरे साथ अभी हुआ आज ही दोपहर को. तो मैंने ना सुबह डोमिनोज का पिज़्ज़ा मंगाया. तो वही ₹1,000. तो द ऑल्टरनेट पर्सपेक्टिव इज कि जब मैंने देखा यार ₹1,000 पिज़्ज़ा ₹1,000 बिकॉज व्हेन यू आर स्पेंडिंग दैट इन सिंगापुर वो पिज़्ज़ा आएगा $15-20. तो जो जैसे शेयर न्यूमेरिकल अमाउंट 15-20 आप निकाल लेते हो.
numbers-
वही चीज तो नंबर ऑफ डिजिट्स 3000 and garlic bread. It's also that.
It is, I think you should not go and order pizza in Vietnam.
The point that I'm trying to make is the cost of things has also increased in India.
Yeah.
So even though we are converting with
I remember college days, pocket money used to be enough to go out a couple of times. Now, if I look back at that pocket money, I don't think I can have a single meal in that if I was to go. The same thing happens when you move out of India. The first time I moved to Singapore, in the first couple of years, everything you're spending, you're converting to rupees, and you're like, yaar, bahut महंगा है यार. हर चीज बहुत महंगी है. Like everything suddenly seems to be so much in terms of rupees, even though in terms of dollars it's not that much. But then you're also earning only that many dollars. So for a couple of years, it stays in your head that you're spending so much in terms of what you were spending in India. Now it's completely changed. When I come here, I feel so comfortable in Delhi or Bombay moving around in an Uber. Because when the charge hits on my credit card, it's just it's under $10 no matter how much I go around. But cab charges obviously in Singapore much higher. But in Singapore, I don't take cab as much. I take public transport. So it's not really a fair comparison. So, but the one thing that has happened, which Sid was also saying, which even before we started recording this, I was going to tell Gaurav, when I change that has happened is you don't necessarily go back to the same kind of places जो आप पहले जा रहे थे when you were either earning your initial salary in India or when you were in college. Your standard of living also has gone up. So when you're going out now in places, you're going out to slightly better places. और खर्चा वहाँ पे almost उतना ही हो जाता है जितना you end up spending in the countries we're all living in right now. Like drinks, when I'm comparing a drink or it was comparing pizza, when I'm ordering a proper dish, it roughly amounts to the same. So I have seen some bills on my last India trip, which completely shocked me because they were not, like I said, it's not money that I was even getting as pocket money for an entire month that I have paid for one person in a dining out experience. But when I convert that back to dollars, it kind of feels like, this is effectively what I would pay if I was to go out to a nice place in Singapore, if I was in the US. So prices in India are going up, which is why even when we discuss the savings, what your fire goal is, I think inflation is going to play a huge impact on that because what 10 crore can buy you today may not be what 10 crore can buy you 20 years from now. That will change drastically.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true, and you're so right in saying that. And I think the broader point I was also trying to make and understand was that those fire goals, the reason I find them a little less trustworthy is because our brains and our behaviors, they evolve and change over time, and we get conditioned to different things. To your point, Dishan, when you're saying that when each of us we move abroad, we are converting from INR to that currency. So even like for us, we used to go and buy groceries, and anything above €2 would feel like a massive spend, right? So because everything was like, 160, 200, so paying that for a bag of potatoes was like crazy. But slowly you get conditioned to that. So now €2 is not even you would consider twice about. It's like, it's on the lower end of the spectrum for us now. But the same thing flips now that when you go back to India, you are not looking at prices. At least I am not. A recent example was we went to a salon. We wanted like a nice day out. So my wife and I went to a salon, got nice haircut, massage and spa. And not even for a single service. We asked what's the price bill there. But if I was living and working in India, I would what the prices are, because at the end of I was happy with the bill. It was, to your point, very much comparable to what an average service would cost here. Although it was a different level there, I agree it was much nicer, but it was not less. So the problem that is now that your brain is so accustomed, your spending habits are so much used to being based on foreign currency that you move back, it would take some time to make that shift and be about things you spend on and think twice about the kind of services you. Otherwise, that fire number is immaterial if you just kind of run out of that money in 5 years based on your current spending habits.
And the one habit that definitely has changed is I have zero bargaining skill. I never bargain when I'm in sale. I have just forgotten how to, like you said, you don't even ask for prices for stuff. You just end up whatever it is, which is another thing that my father just couldn't understand. He gets really upset with it, which we didn't do. That has changed.
Yes. Coming to the topic of expenses, I think Ishan, you had an interesting thought earlier about the cost of living. You want to get into that?
We wanted to kind of also understand, because we're trying to find people from different cities, different countries, to get perspectives on, since this is chai pe kharcha, what is the kharcha like in these places? So what is your perspective on Dublin as a city from a cost of living point of view? Like, what are your biggest expenses? What should someone coming there be looking at? What kind of income is good for someone for the first time? And also, from your perspective, we have follow-up questions, but from your perspective, how have things evolved for you in the last few years?
And it's a lengthy one, and I don't have any state government figures, so I'll just purely go by what I have heard in my circles and my personal experience. So I think like any other big metro, and again, even though Dublin kind of comes into the category of big metros and Rohit can attest to it, it's very much still a town-like feel to it, which I don't complain. I like that kind of peace and quiet, but it lives up to the expenses of big cities. And I think like any other big city, the biggest expense is your rental or household. So I think roti, kapra, makan, those are like the three things which cost you the most. So which is like your cost of accommodation, your cost of groceries and everyday utility, and a little bit on just kind of what kind of lifestyle you prefer. Based on that, your shopping, eating, spending habits, I think those qualify for the biggest expenses on a day-to-day basis. Housing, if I give you a very rough estimate, uh, it's like an average two-bedroom house would cost you anywhere close to 2,000 to 2,500 euros, right? And this means that, like, for most people, I don't know if it's similar in how you guys do it in Singapore. A lot of people would do house sharing, so two-bedroom house, two people will share that. So if you are coming alone and as a single person, your expenses get split up. So you can target like anywhere between 1,000 to 1,200 euros as your rental. I think after that, the biggest expense would be your utility plus your groceries, around, again, ballpark 50 euros every 2 months for your internet, around 100 to 200 euros every 2 months for your electricity bill, depending upon how energy efficient your house is. It can be way higher than that. And then groceries, again, I think like with global inflation going up, the prices have increased between the range of 15 to 20% across the board for milk, vegetables, anything that you buy on a typical basis. So, just to give you an estimate, when we used to go out for grocery shopping to one of the supermarkets, and if I keep aside some of the uh, unnecessary expenses we used to do in terms of picking things for treats or like small toys for the kid, if I just barely stick to things which are essence, like cereals, milk, vegetable, fruits, wine, liquor, you know, all the necessary stuff, would cost you somewhere around between 60 to 80 euros. You would get a good cart full of groceries. Now, the same thing would cost you upward of 100, 120 euros. That's the kind of shift that has happened. This would last you like a week or two. So in a month, you can very well expect, if you are not eating out too much and you're cooking at home, you're looking at around 150, 200 euros worth of grocery per person in the household. So I think when I look at that, what that means is that around 1800, between 1800 to 2000 euros for a single person is gone in just living and having a comfortable life in Dublin with all the basic stuff covered. I'm not even talking about travel. I'm not talking about your fancy dine out experiences. This is just living and having a comfortable life. And if you add the upper rate of taxation, which is at 40%, that means that if you are getting a salary of close to 3,000, that you are left with almost nothing to a couple of hundred euros change in your hand, right? So we can do the backward calculation and see that if you have a lifestyle which requires more money and more, earning more, what is the kind of band you are targeting to have that kind of money and still have some more to save and invest. So it's not an inexpensive city to live in like many others.
Yeah. And how has that changed for you, especially after having a kid? Like how does that expense come in when I'm talking about having a kid? How does healthcare work, for example? Because that would be, I'm assuming, when you have a child, one of the bigger expenses.
That's a good one. Actually, the thing is, we moved here when I already had a kid in Hyderabad. So we moved with a small baby. He was like 4 months old. So I think how it changed for me is like when I moved here, obviously my wife had a job back in India. She had to quit that job because, you can get a role at the same time as my move. So she had to quit the job. And also our son was very young. So she kind of took maternity break for about a year and a half to look after him, which meant that for the initial years in a new city, we were almost on a single income. And since we were a family, obviously, we couldn't go for any shared accommodation. We wanted to have our own space as well. So all those expenses, they kind of double up. So there was very little room in terms of the in hand you get and the extent to which you can save. Right. So obviously the cost, everything was on the higher side for us. As years moved on and as our son became slightly sort of self-sufficient and we started putting him into daycare, which by the way is going to be one of the biggest expenses if you have a child here. A typical daycare depending upon the age of the child and how self-sustained they are, would cost you anywhere between 8 to 900 to 1200 to 1300 euros a month, which means if the average salary in Ireland is around 2500, 2800 euros. And if you take like that 1300 out of it, you're talking about 50% of your salary just going in childcare. And that's one of the reasons where a lot of couples, they don't work, like one of them won't work because essentially after tax money, almost all of it is going in childcare, and then they have to also balance their work life, family life. So it's a lot of effort and energy. So if it doesn't make sense financially, people prefer like one partner stays home and looks after the child. But that's more typical to the Irish community or society. It's very difficult for us and our families to stay put, especially because in winters the weather gets a bit on the gloomier side, gray and dark and so on. So you would go crazy sitting at home. Anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but childcare is one of the biggest costs associated when you have a child. But thankfully, then my wife also went back to work, so we were again back on the dual income. So it became like one part of our expenses, but not something that was predominantly taking away from a lot of it. Other things, thankfully, the state, when they charge you so much tax, I think, and I've shared this with a few people, that if you're coming to Dublin as a single person, it's very hard to see that all the taxes that you're paying, if that is giving you back any benefits, at least not while you're young. But I think when you have a family, the perspective shifts slightly because one, you're taxed differently. As a couple, you get like a slightly more rebate in terms of the amount on which you get taxed at a higher bracket. That's one. Second is, if you have a child, a young child, most of their medical expenses, like vaccinations, the GP visits, if they fall sick, all of that is free of cost for children under, I think it used to be 6, now they have made it 8 years. So if a child is under 8, all those expenses are free of cost. And if they have like anything which requires further treatment and hospitalization, and if the GP kind of refers them to the hospital, all that also kind of gets taken care of. So that I think is a big benefit. And of course, like my son started schooling a couple of years back, and predominantly it's the state schools. So which means there is no education fee per se. There are small expenses related to some of their stationaries and uniforms, but those are like pocket change compared to, if you consider cost of education back in India, and I'm sure even in Singapore, it's quite on the higher side. So those things come out of your tax benefits, and that's what I think as a family you can experience as something you're getting in return of all the taxes you're paying.
And I'm sure Rohit has this question as well, but since we're on the topic, since we spoke about healthcare for kids, that's amazing that they're doing it free till the age of 8. But what about adults? Like, do you guys have to go for any private insurers? How does it work when it comes to healthcare expenses for you guys?
Yeah, and it's a tricky one because no, I think the government has public healthcare. The infrastructure of it cannot cater to the everyday needs of people. That's the harsh reality. I mean, I think unlike some of the other developed economies, their health infrastructure is still somewhat in a different era altogether. If you have life-threatening issues and emergencies, you get priority. But if you, let's say, have severe back pain or a broken finger or pain in the leg, those things do not qualify as life-threatening. So even though they are massively inconvenient and disrupt your life, they don't get any level of priority in public healthcare system. So the way to go is to have private health insurance. And I think a lot of us have been lucky in the past that our employer's insurance scheme, I think it's quite comprehensive. It covers a lot of things that the general insurance does not cover. For example, dental benefits is something that a regular policy would not cover in Ireland. But because we have this extended plan and more expansive coverage, we get all of that. We have the health insurance for now, but again, depending on how the employment status changes and evolves, we'll have to see. You definitely cannot just rely on the public health system. You have to have your own to get looked after better, especially in your older years.
And does any of this change if you've been there long enough to a citizen? The
primary difference is in the healthcare itself. Once you are of a certain age and you are a citizen, you are granted access to the public healthcare. But again, the infrastructure and the burden on the current medical system is such that they won't really put you on a higher priority if you go with these kind of non-threatening or non-critical issues. So I've seen like even very elderly people waiting in the emergency rooms, where if they have something where they had a slip and fell and have like a pain in their leg, which is a big deal for an elderly person, but it does not qualify as something which is going to be, life threatening in the immediate sense. So they would be put on a wait list for 10 hours, 12 hours. And after that, they get looked after. So I think if you have a private insurance, that just fast tracks things a little bit, gives you slightly better access to healthcare. But I would still say that the medical system in general, I feel like India is still way advanced. Like if in case, especially if you have money to spend, you can get looked after much better there than you will be here even with a private insurance.
Interesting.
But yeah, to answer your question predominantly, that's what takes your citizenship status.
I have a question related to that specifically, the citizenship status piece. There is an emotional aspect to it as well, right? The Bharat ka passport, at least it's, in my case, it is. So is it a factor in your decision making? Or if it is, how are you justifying it in your mind? कि ये करने से ये होगा और फिर कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा and things like that.
Okay, so you were cutting out a little bit. So just to be clear, are you asking that is there like an emotional aspect to the decision of taking citizenship and getting naturalized here? How I'm going to deal with the emotional aspect of it, right? Was that the question? Yeah.
Yes, that was the question. Yeah.
Okay. Now, yeah, I think it's a very valid question, because the way I see it, it's a head and heart decision, right? And I think I can make out in this group, I think there is a very strong sentiment and pride associated with being Desi, right? And same is true for me. Like I'm forever Desi at heart. In fact, just last night, my wife and I were joking that we go out and go to different countries and cities in Europe just to have the different experiences. But the first thing I look for is whenever I land in a new city is that how close is the Sarvana Bhavan? Because I want to go and have the Desi food first. So that is, I don't think that's going to go away just because, a piece of paper or a passport says that I belong to a different nationality. So I think I'll always look at myself as, Desi person, Indian before any other culture or nation. It's more of what overpowers that sentiment is the benefits that our Indian passport does not offer. One is the Irish passport. It's one of the top 5 or 6, allows you a lot of travel opportunities without the visa. I don't want to spend a lot of time in this episode, but we have had our own issues with having faced challenges and certain sort of denial of travel because of the visa status and why our child did not have a visa, and we couldn't get visa on time. So I think all those experiences culminate into trying to get some sort of ease of access to travel. And that's one of the biggest reasons. The other is because we also want to move around and experience what's working and living in different countries. Having a European citizenship allows you to do that quite seamlessly across Europe, right? So moving to Amsterdam or Berlin or France, that is one really good advantage of it. The add-on benefit with an Irish citizenship is that Ireland is probably the only country in EU which has ease of access to mainland Europe. And despite the Brexit, they have their back channel with UK, where your passport and citizenship allows you to stay and work in UK as well. So London is a very intriguing city and opportunity that feels that, you need to go and live and experience what it is there. So I think those are like two main things. The other one is the education of the child, which is a big expense. And just being an EU citizen allows him to get sort of a subsidized access to the education at a higher level, graduates and postgraduate education. And even now, you don't have to be a citizen for it. Being here allows him to get access to that international curriculum and exposure to more diverse kind of diversity right at the early age, so that when he gets into actual workforce at some point, there would not be an adjustment period like for most of us.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well thought out and well phrased. Like I, I personally feel a lot of internal struggle. It's something as basic as getting a permanent residency, which is not a citizenship. It's just you get to stay in the country. You don't need to have a job, and you can still continue living there for a while. I struggle with even the concept of that. But as you said, it's a head versus heart sort of a decision, and maybe you are optimizing for something at one point in your life and then optimizing for something else at another point. So it kind of goes back and forth. Cool. I think we have gone into a lot of different directions today. Hopefully, this was enjoyable. Thank you so much, Gaurav, for joining us and sharing so much about your life, your experiences, spending so much time with us on this episode. I hope you had a good time talking to us as well. And we'll hopefully have you again in another episode soon. And
Yeah. Like,
think
it was
that-
great fun chatting with you all, and then most importantly knowing you all. So looking forward to it. And yeah, keep doing the good work.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Have a nice weekend, guys. Bye.